Okay, this is more of a demonstration than a code review or anything. It's kind of silly. The idea is I wanted to test out and get familiar with Azure web services. And if you log on to azure.com, you can get a free account. They'll give you $200 credit for your first month. And if you're subscribed to like Visual Studio Enterprise, you might get a $150 a month credit. I'd say be careful beyond that because once your credits expire, they want you to do pay as you go, and you might inadvertently write some code that causes some sort of loop, and you could really rack up the fees. But I'm really keen on learning about Azure and the intelligent services they offer in their marketplace, aside from their hosting and DevOps utilities. But so what I thought I'd do is I kind of scripted out a task for myself. I wanted to build a console application where I could just type in a word and it would render the image within a console. Of course, that means converting the pixels into some sort of ASCII representation. I had no idea how I would approach this problem, but I figure I'd just kind of dive in. And what I ended up doing was I learned a little bit as I went along, and I really just took a hacker approach to the problem. I wasn't trying to build something that could scale. It's really just about exploring and building a proof of concept that could make this happen. And along that way, the journey got me to learn about Azure. It got me to learn more about console applications and Visual Studio and other things like that. So before I dive in, I'll just kind of give an explanation to what it is I built. So ideally, you think of searching, you say, I'm going to go search to Google, but Azure, well, that's owned by Microsoft. Google owns Google. And so Microsoft's flavor of search is Bing. So what I did was I ended up going to their marketplace. And if you search the marketplace for like image search, I'm wondering if it's that smart. It doesn't look like it is. But if you search for Bing, you can see Bing search is a thing. And it'll take you to a page that gives you an overview. And you can see that there's an API for Bing Image Search. And go ahead and click on that. And, some information about what it is, the kind of, it's just an API. You pass certain parameters in and you get results of images back. And then what you're really doing is you're getting a list of URLs to images available publicly to the web. The idea is you would do the search, grab the image, bring it down as a serialized byte array, and then convert those bytes into pixels that you can render within Console App. Now, of course, I didn't want to do the work of converting byte array to pixels, so I also, searched Stack Overflow and other resources. Somebody else must have done this already, and that's the real idea here. So, so what I ended up doing was you can click once you've searched for Bing, they have this thing where you create the service, and you can go ahead and enter the name that you want to call it. You choose the subscription to which you would apply, and they've got their pricing tiers. For what I'm doing, I want the cheapest thing possible. I think F1 is what they call it. I've already subscribed to it, but I'm just kind of showing you the screen. This is basically their free search. You get, I think, 3 searches per second. And for what I'm doing, I barely do 1 per second while I'm testing. So this is not something I'm going to be hosting. It's just a proof of concept. You could really, I would say be careful because you could really ratchet up the calls. If you wrote some utility that did bulk searches, you could really use up your free credits. And fortunately, while you're using your free credits, it'll just simply disable the service unless you explicitly say, hey, I don't want to do that. Then they'll just start billing your credit card. So be careful about that option. So once you've added it to and configured it to, it shows up on your market on your dashboard. Here you're going to click on it and you'll configure basically your endpoints and your key. I'm just using a temporary key in, while I'm testing it. You want to be very careful not to make that key public. Don't check it into GitHub or anything. If someone were to get access to that key, they would just be doing searches on behalf of your service. So that's another point where you just want to be a little careful. So once you've set it up and an endpoint exists, then you can just start writing some code and hit that endpoint. So I'll go ahead and do a really quick demonstration of what I'm doing here. It's just a Visual Studio app. Actually, I'll go ahead and show that I have this on GitHub. I don't have a tremendous GitHub library, but if you want to pull it down, it's a Fabricari/text-2-image-2-ASCII. And you can pull it down warts and all. I've kind of tweaked the code a little bit here and there, but it's not really intended for reuse. It's good for tinkering. And that kind of stuff I don't mind putting onto GitHub. Of course, make sure that in your configuration file you don't have any keys if you're to put this on your own GitHub. But I don't care if anybody reuses this. So I'll go ahead and run it and just show you what it does. So the first thing you notice, it's a console app. The hardest part was getting the thing to resize to the image, to the image to the size of the screen. Then you go ahead and it'll prompt you to enter the name of any object and it'll ASCII it. So I like putting silly names. It uses Bing, so it has all of the switches that Bing offers, like the safe search, moderate search, image sizes, image quality. So I could enter like Kirby. That's a fun video game. It's going to go out and do a search, and ta-da, it renders Kirby in full, beautiful, low resolution color. So what it's doing there is it's looking for images with a limited number of pixels, and it converts those pixel by pixel into a block of ASCII text. So if I hit enter and try again, we can enter Luigi's Mansion. And here you see low resolution image of Luigi. So what's some other fun stuff we can do? I can remember how to spell Nintendo. I think we see a Nintendo Switch right there. If I type Link, Zelda, let's see if it's smart enough. That's not really a good image. It's hit or miss. That's kind of the fun of this. Waffles. I guess you can, if you squint your eyes, you can sort of see that this could be a waffle. Not well. If I squint my eyes, I kind of see some breakfast laid out there. But so what's some other goofy stuff? Zelda. That one's hard to see. How about Baby Yoda? That's a thing. There we go. That's identifiable. If you squint your eyes, you see adorable little Baby Yoda. All right. So if I hit escape, it'll exit the program. So I'll just show very quickly the code that I'm doing. This is very much a hack and run kind of proof of concept. So I spent a lot of time just trying to clean up the main console app. I like to throw some comments where I stole the code if I did steal the code. And well, for one, Microsoft has a nice little documentation on their API. And that's the page I just showed you. And it shows you how to use the application. To resize the console app, this was surprisingly difficult for me. I had to do a little Google searching and found out that you don't have access to things outside of the console from the console. So you have to access the kernel 32 DLL and the user 32 DLL to get access to the pointers for the window, and then to be able to move the window on behalf of the user. So you just have to declare them, and then you have access to them. This is something I've been doing. I've been doing C# for a while, and I never knew you could do this until I tried this out. So you've got the main app. This is where we write all our hello worlds. So the first thing I want to do is position the window, get that over with. And the next thing I wanted to do was initialize the console. So positioning the window, I go ahead and just call those, first I get the console window, and then I move it. And that's just executing the API, Win API functions that are available. Once I want to initialize the console, so here I'm setting the title to, this is the channel's name and just the name of the text to ASCII. I found that I was resetting the console colors several times in the application, so I extracted this into a simple little method. It's just setting the background color and the foreground color, because the neat thing about console apps is it'll just use whatever colors you had left. You set it to call clear to basically blank out the screen and start over. And then I wanted to set the window size. You notice I subtracted a little bit, and that's because of all this navigation crap on the bottom and the little scroll bars on the side. If I didn't have these, then it would actually go further than the width and the height of the screen. But since I'm running this on different screens, I wanted this to be kind of dynamic. And then I have the actual main piece of the application convert the words to ASCII art, and that's kind of a wordy method. I like wordy methods. I try to avoid being super verbose with my comments, but I also will start by writing comments to, as I'm doing pseudocode. First, I tell myself, okay, what do I want to do here? I want to clear the screen. Then I want to initialize local variables. Once I realize that the code is self-documenting, I can kind of remove those comments. I haven't really done that for all of this yet, but I did clean up some of the other ones. So I can just kind of show the general flow. So here, not quite functional programming, it's nested functions, but I was too lazy to write extension methods. So it's first thing I'm going to do is get the image name, then I'll get the image URL, and get the image byte array from URL. An earlier iteration of this, I was actually just calling these separately and doing error handling. I was experimenting with a different pattern. I actually got this out of clean code, where when you're getting the image name, you go ahead and do the exception handling there, and you try not to return nulls, and it keeps your code a little bit cleaner. Then you can basically tighten up your code and let the exception handler deal with the message that comes back. So here the domain of this is to get the image name, and it does that by prompting the user, hey, enter the name of an object to ASCII. It gets that name from the console, and then it does a little validation, throws an exception if it fails, and returns the image name. Honestly, I usually like to return nulls and have the calling method do the error handling, but like I said, I just recently read this in clean code that the idea is you should return something or throw an exception. So I wanted to see if that would make my code cleaner. Here, we're getting the image from the URL. This is the part that uses the Azure service. This is really what I wanted to experiment with. I've got some, configuration manager just out of the box app settings. I'm not going to click on it because it has the URL and the key on it, but you would get your own, and you would just create your own app settings. So I have this helper class called Bing Search. I kind of derived it from Microsoft's utility. So I'll click on that and you can see what I'm doing here. And basically I wanted it to do only the minimum of what I'm trying to do here. No reason to have all the code they have to use Bing. I should probably rename this to Bing Image Search. So in fact, I'll do that right now, because it's really specific. So I just kind of like simple dependency injection. I don't think it's Bing's job to know how to get the key in the URA, but it does depend on it. So I let that inject into the constructor. Let's see. Then there's really one method. Actually, let me. So I new up the image search. I pass those in, and then I call get image, and it has a bunch of optional parameters. Whoop. There we go. So you can see here's the real meat and potatoes. Just get image URL, and it's gonna. This is where you pass in the search term. I made basically a nullable height and aspect ratio. There's safe search, image type, image size, image freshness. I turned all of those into enums. I thought if I was going to ever make this code reusable, it would be cool to have it as an enum. And all the enums, I just made them. Normally, I would have enums go into a separate file, but I put them as like subclasses within the same class. So image freshness, these are the options that Microsoft looks for. So I wanted those to be fixed values so I wouldn't inadvertently do something else. Also, I wanted names that were kind of meaningful. I'm pretty sure I copied this from their API, from their sample code, and maybe I tweaked it a little bit to be a little more readable for me. I probably added some comments more than I should have, but and here, really, this is just a wrapper of an API call. If you've made RESTful calls, really, I'm just newing up an HTTP client. I'm passing in, it's a get, pretty much. So I have this URA that I'm building up. So all those properties that came in, they just become part of the query string. And as you notice that these are all optional parameters, they all have to have default values because their API does expect some default values, or at least they expect you to omit them. But I figure by doing it this way, I could have my default values. So yep, that's pretty much it. I'm building up the URI, and then I'm doing a get async. So it's just a get. Here, just setting some default headers. This is the key. This is how you pass the key in. So it's kind of like their authentication. So I get the result. I probably should have just called this result instead of response. I like to just do a basic is success status code. So I check for 500s. This is where an example of me returning null. I might, if I were refactoring here, this actually throw a more meaningful exception. So if it succeeds, it'll just return the string. If it fails for any number of reasons, I would just throw a specific exception and trap it further up the stack. The problem with returning null is, well, you've got to do null checks, and if you forget to do null checks, that makes your code less robust. Okay, so once I've verified that I did get a response, I'm going to extract the content as a string, basically get it as JSON, and then I want to deserialize it. So JSON convert, deserialize, turn it into a search result object. This could be any object that you create locally. I think I just made it a private class. I'm going to get a value, and I'm going to get it it's going to have a subclass to my subclass called content URL. This is determined by their API. So if you're going to be doing any kind of binding, you need to make sure to have a class that matches the hierarchy of the object that you're getting back. Once you have the search result, then you just really, all I'm trying to get is the content URL. I'm using these, I had a friend tell me these are called Elvis operators because that little question mark looks like some curly hair over the eye. I think that's cute. But so anyway, once I get the search result, I'm really just getting the URL. And that's the whole purpose of this method, is to get the URL. So once I have the URL, that's it for Bing. And now I'm actually going to, once I have the image URL, I can then go ahead and, I'm going to validate it, return it, and then I can get an image byte array from the URL, and that's going to be down here. And here I make another HTTP client, but this time I'm not calling Bing, I'm calling the URL that Bing gave me. So this could be hosted by anybody. And I'm kind of trusting that Bing's safe search is going to be adequate. And so I go ahead and make that call. It is possible that Bing's results are cached and that image gets pulled down. So I got to do a little error handling to verify that, hey, I can actually get a result, and make sure it's not a 500, that it is in fact a 200. And if it isn't, I throw an exception. Here I did refactor it to use exceptions instead of nulls. I kind of like it because it means that this method kind of owns the responsibility and any exception handling of getting that byte array. So, all right, once I've got that content, well, the HTTP content has a built-in method, read as byte array. And that's why I chose to do it that way, kind of going with the flow, literally. Once I have that byte array, now, the next question is, all right, I want to be able to display this image to console, and I'm going to pass in a byte array. And this is where I really did a lot of Google Foo and Stack Overflow, and it helped me find some other developers' examples of iterating through the byte array. I know that I've got to loop through the number of rows and the number of columns within that row, and then I've got to call a helper that's going to convert the pixel into basically a console-friendly pixel. So the way I do that is there's this little helper that's going to pass the color of the pixel in, and I'm just setting foreground color and background color, and I'm writing out a console character. This console character is determined basically by the blend of colors. So in ASCII, there are characters that are kind of like checkers, and they have different densities, and based on the calculation, it chooses which of those characters to use. And that's really where the ASCII art comes in. If you'd like to know more, like I said, hit that GitHub and pull it down, or try to build your own. This is just more of a demonstration. So I'll go ahead and run this one more time. And now that you know how the code actually runs, it'll make a little more sense. So let's do old Yoda. There's good old Yoda. I'll do baby Yoda. And then we do Mandalorian. Let's see if that shows up. Yeah, kind of looks like the logo. We can do what do I do? 2 A's and Bubba. I'll find out soon enough. Yeah. So I guess his dad was a Mandalorian, so that's the tie-in there. All right, and let's see. Oh, they're actually showing the animal Wolverine instead of the comic book. If I do X-Men. That's from the movie, it looks like. So, all right, well, that's how that works. Cool.